Let's call the council meeting to order. Ally, could you please take roll?
Councilmember Bruce Bassett. Here. Councilmember Jane Brom. Here. Councilmember Mike Sarrow. Councilmember Mike Grady.
Here.
Councilmember Dan Gross.
Here.
Deputy Mayor El Jenke.
I'm here.
Mayor Jim Pearman.
And I'm here. And tonight, actually, we have a special guest, Chip Corder, who's joined us this evening, our first time up here. And isn't this something? Should we make him do a speech, or what do you think, guys? I mean, what do you think?
Tell us something about yourself.
Yes.
Who are you?
Speak. I'm here because I drew the short straw.
Great. Okay. With that, we're going to get on with, we just finished our study session, and we have special business. We have National Recovery Month proclamation, and it is the City of Mercer Island proclamation, whereas behavioral health is an essential part of health and one's overall wellness, and prevention works, treatment is effective, and people can and do recover from substance abuse and mental disorders. And whereas all people have the fundamental inherent value to be accepted and treated with respect, human dignity, and worth, and whereas individuals should have access to fully participate in community life, including economic advancement and prosperity, fair and decent housing, quality education, positive opportunities to benefit from and contribute to material, cultural, and social progress, and whereas it is critical to educate our policymakers, friends, and family members, healthcare providers, and businesses that substance use and mental disorders are treatable, and that people should seek assistance for these conditions with the same urgency as they would any other health condition. And whereas all Americans have the opportunity to access provisions within the Affordable Care Act and Mental Health Parity and Addictions Equity Act, MHPAEA, aim to improve physical and emotional health while ensuring people will receive the care they need at a more reasonable cost. And whereas substance use and mental disorders are serious public health problems, in 2009, 4.3 million people received treatment for a substance use disorder and 30.2 million people for a mental health problem. We must continue to reach the millions more who need help. And now, therefore, I, Jim Pearman, Mayor of the City of Mercer Island, do hereby proclaim the month of September 2011 as National Recovery Month. Prevention works, treatment is effective, people recover in Mercer Island, and call upon our citizens to observe this month with appropriate programs and activities to help more people achieve long-term recovery and learn how recovery positively benefits the nation's overall well-being. Signed the 6th day of September 2011. So, it's a good thing, and I was delighted to support that and read that when I was asked to do that. So with that, we'll go on now to appearances. So if anyone would like to come and address the City Council, please come forward, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes to address the Council. Would anyone like to address the City Council?
I'm Dr. Osmondson, Bill Osmondson. I'm a dentist in Bellevue, Washington, and I appreciate your comments on September as Recovery Month. I had a little presentation on fluoridation, but one of the points that we need to consider is that fluoridation has never been FDA approved. Food and Drug Administration, Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and Washington state law say that fluoride, when used as with the intent of preventing disease, is a drug. The Washington Board of Pharmacy wrote a letter and said that it is a prescription drug. So what we're talking about when we talk about fluoridation is that it is a drug. In front of you, you should have, if it was handed out yet, a little handout like this, and it has some points that will be presented that you can read later. But the number one request that I have is that on the water bill, little notice be given to customers that for infants, breastfeeding is best. Use non-fluoridated water for formula and drinking. It's a very simple, inexpensive health education presentation. I know you get your water from Seattle, at least I think you do, and you don't put the fluoride in it yourself. You do not formulate the drug. However, you can add some advisories to people who are at risk. Let me give you a quick one here. This data was published in Journal of American Dental Association. You can see on this side of the line are all the studies that show that infants are getting too much fluoride. Now let me go over this one here too. It's important. This one is in, again, 2009, same issue. We can see here how at 0.3, there's dental fluorosis in the blue line. At 0.3 to 0.7 parts per million in water, that's what you're getting now is 0.7. You have the increase in dental fluorosis. And then as it goes from 0.7 to 1.2, it goes up higher and higher on dental fluorosis. You can see here that this is the amount of dental decay that you have with the different amounts of fluoride in the water. It doesn't really make any difference if you have less than 0.3 or if you have more than 1.2. You have all about the exact same amount of decay because fluoridation does not reduce dental decay. That was the hardest part for me to swallow as a dentist. Okay, and I have 24 seconds. The EPA fluoride exposure and relative source contribution analysis. This is what the EPA, they're not in charge of adding fluoride into the water. They're in charge of getting the fluoride out when it's too much. And what they're saying, they've got new data that they just came out with, and they're showing that even with their new data, everything above this line, the children above this line, are going to be harmed. And they only go down to 6 months of age because they don't help the children before that. About 80% of children below 6 months will be harmed. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. If there's anything else you'd like to leave with the city clerk, it would be great.
I did. Any
Okay.
questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to address the council?
My name is James Robert Deal. I'm an attorney from Linwood, and I'm the president of Fluoride Class Action and the vice president of Washington Safe Water. We have members in Mercer Island, so that's why several of us have come from different jurisdictions, even though we're just talking to you here in Mercer Island. The CDC is the source of information about fluoride. They claim that it reduces cavities 17 to 25%. However, in Europe, the rate of tooth decay has dropped just as much as in the United States, and Europe is not fluoridated. At the same time, the CDC is admitting that 41% of our children aged 12 to 15 have dental fluorosis, and of that number, about 8% have moderate and 3% have severe dental fluorosis. That's brown spots on the teeth with pitting. So it's a serious issue. The CDC also admits that babies should not have their formula mixed up with fluoridated water, at least until they're 2 years of age. So we've identified certain populations that are being harmed by fluoridation, but the CDC nevertheless perpetuates this myth that it's good for the teeth. The problem I want to stress is that the type of fluoride you're using is silica fluoride. It contains lead, and it dissolves the lead out of the pipes. And in 2006, Seattle discovered that there was lead in school drinking water at 1,600 parts per billion. This is the cheap, commercial, toxic waste version of fluoride. And that's what we're using, because it's cheaper than the original fluoride, which was the sodium fluoride. So not only schools, Seattle spent millions of dollars taking out the pipes and putting in new pipes, but what about all the houses where there's lead in the pipes? New houses have 8% lead in the brass in your fittings and in your pipes. Older houses, apartment buildings, 30% lead. So the silica fluoride dissolves out the lead, and this city doesn't add the fluoride, but by law, you're supposed to be giving lead notices. Now, I put all this information with documentation in the paperwork that I handed out to you. So what you should do about it? You should demand that the City of Seattle supply you with a non-fluoridated source of water. They can run another pipe down here. Second, you should insist that they hold you harmless. And you should also have your city attorney consult with your insurance company and make sure that you're covered. Now, what about tetraethyl lead? For 50 years, this lie was perpetuated. The same people that brought you tetraethyl lead in the gasoline are the same people who promoted fluoridation. Why is that? Because there's money in it. Big chemical corporations contribute to legislators who make sure that certain people are appointed to CDC who perpetuate this myth. Consider these important facts.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council?
How do I put this? Did I just grab this? Oh, okay. That was easy. Do I just start speaking?
Your name and address, please.
Okay. My name is Linda Happer. My address is 14523 281st Avenue Northeast in Duval, Washington. And I'm, I guess, just a very concerned citizen who has recently done a fairly high amount of research on fluoride. And I really got scared and then concerned, and I'm here not because this is a fun thing to do, but I'd like to share what I learned with you really quick, and I understand I only have 3 minutes, right? Silicon fluoride is the name of the chemical that you add to your water. Do you know where it comes from? They scrape it out of industrial smokestacks. It's not treated. It goes straight into your water from your water department. What can it do once it gets inside your body? If you have perfectly functioning kidneys, hopefully it will be excreted. If you don't have perfectly functioning kidneys, or if you are a baby between the year of 0 and 3 years old, you're going to retain some of it. The organs keep the fluoride. The bones absorb fluoride, and once it's in the bones, it never leaves your body. Fluoride is one of the prime suspects in bone cancer and leukemia. In women, the thyroid gland absorbs more thyroid than any other gland in the body, and it's becoming so commonly known now because of the research and the internet. They're having articles in women's magazines warning you not to drink your city water because it affects your thyroid, makes you super tired all the time. I personally have suffered from a low thyroid problem about 25 years. And I'm perfectly healthy. I have no major or minor diseases. My doctors could never offer any reason why, and I'm beginning to suspect if I go in and get tested that I'm going to have a fairly high amount of fluoride in my thyroid gland just from living in Bellevue and Duval and every city I've lived in. I'm a native of the East Side, so I've been drinking it since age 0. Babies are very high risk at fluoride because of their small, tiny little bodies, and they drink way more fluids per ratio than an adult. And if that fluoride stays in their body, this is why it's becoming suspect that bone cancer and leukemia is caused by this industrial waste. And yes, I have read research papers of people that are against fluoride, super educated doctors and research scientists, and you can get all the information from these two gentlemen. Please consider not putting it in your drinking water. I just beg you. If you don't have time to do the research, please appoint someone within your city who can accept the research and give you a report on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council? Okay, seeing none, we will close. Yes. Oh, please come forward.
Hi, I'm Tamara Smilanich. I live in Seattle, and I've actually interviewed during a community meeting, as I'm a chair, but I won't tell you what community because I'm not speaking on that note there, but I had the Water Quality Lab of Seattle come to our meeting just about probably 3 months ago. City employed, but he's over at a private lab that is contracted with City of Seattle, and he did say that we distribute water to 1.3 million, I believe, customers. I don't know if Mercer Island was included or not since you wholesale your water, but I did find out that hexafluoride fluorosilicic acid, H2SiF6 for the chemists is what it's called. And I did double check with the Northwest Regional District Office in Washington State, the Drinking Water Division, Dick Pedler, as a matter of fact, today, and asked him if that's what goes in the water, and he confirmed it is. And there is municipalities all across Washington State that receive this. And the reason I started researching the fluoride in the water is because when the baby bottles, what was it last year, the bisphenol A, BPA, in baby bottles was taken out by Washington State law, I got to wondering, well, okay, what am I drinking out of? What's possibly polluting my body? And then I started talking to the dentist, and he kind of hinted, well, for babies, and toddlers, we recommend toothpaste without fluoride. So he was trying to hint to me something in so many words. And so in doing this research, I just urge you, because you probably have your own suspicions as to why this topic is coming up out of the blue by so many people from out of your city, it is a growing concern. And just know that City of Seattle is hearing from residents about getting the fluoride out of the water, and obviously Everett, Linwood, there's other people bringing this up to other municipalities. So as a council, I do urge perhaps in the future a resolution to, after you've done some research, a resolution to get perhaps the fluoride out of the water with pressure on the big provider, City of Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council? I would. Please.
I'm Dr. David John. I live at 8817 Southeast 61st Street on Mercer Island. Like most people, I used to believe that fluoridation prevents tooth decay. But then after many hours of studying the research, I've been deeply shocked to find out that there is essentially no decrease in cavity problems in fluoridated areas. In the 1960s and 70s, John Calhoun, New Zealand's top dental officer, succeeded in promoting fluoridation widely throughout the country. In 1980, he learned, though, that studies in Australia, Asia, North America, and Europe showed very little difference. Therefore, he went back and checked tooth decay records for all 5-year-olds and all 12-year-olds in New Zealand, in the whole country. And he found no decrease at all in cavities. John also learned of extensive dental fluorosis in those areas, and to his great credit, he spent the rest of his life trying to get the very communities that he had talked into fluoridating to stop doing it. I really believe that if there were equally courageous U.S. researchers, dental authorities, and public officials who would admit they were wrong on fluoridation, we would have stopped it now in the whole United States. In 1981, Dr. Ziegelbecker reviewed all published studies done so far in the world comparing fluoridated areas and non-fluoridated areas, and he found no cavity reduction. Can you hear that? He reviewed all the world's literature and found no cavity reduction. The largest survey of tooth decay ever done in the United States was done in 1986 on almost 40,000 children, ages 5 through 17, from 84 different communities. They were divided into 3 groups: those who never lived in fluoridated areas, those who always lived in such areas, and those who lived part of the time in each kind of area. The results were not released. Finally, Dr. John Yamianis used the Freedom of Information Act to pry loose the figures. He quickly realized why they hadn't been released, because they showed no significant difference between the 3 groups in decay rate of permanent teeth. And then after that, a couple of people from the study group, Brunel and Carlos, did some complicated, very difficult to even understand statistical study of the same data, where they divided the teeth into 100 different surfaces, and then they said that fluoride saved 6/10 of one surface. Remember, they were working on the same data. And then they had the gall to claim that that was a savings of 18%. You do the math. Anyway, finally, in closing, in 1992, former EPA scientist who worked there for 20 years and was the head of the union of all the EPA scientists said fluoridation is the greatest case of scientific fraud of this century, and here's how bad it is. They're selling this stuff on Mercer Island.
I'll need you to wrap up
Fluoride
your
water for
comments.
babies. How
Great.
crazy can you be?
Great, thank you. If there's anything you'd like to leave with the city clerk, feel free to do so.
I really appreciate your time we're here. It's such a nice asset. My name's Golda Star. I also am concerned about fluoride.
And I'm sorry, your address?
Address, I'm in Salton,
Okay,
from Salton.
great.
We used to think that fluoride was good for people. I thought that. Probably everybody in this room thought that. We didn't have any reason not to think that. At this point, we're at a new crossroads. There's new research that's available, new research that's encouraging us to rethink fluoride. I'm a medical social worker. I've spent my career working for the state of Washington. I work with sick people, dying people, and just the aged. I've never in my career considered having any kind of an issue with water fluoridation. That is, until 16 months ago, when I found out that I was in third stage kidney failure. My doctors, plural, said there was nothing they could do for me until I needed kidney dialysis, which was coming up. So I did my own research. I eliminated all fluoride from my diet, and in only 4 months, my kidney function improved by 90%. If I hadn't done that 16 months ago, I'd be facing starting kidney dialysis in a couple months from now. That's a big deal to me. I've never had a client be told that they need to not have fluoridated water, a kidney client. To me, that's a big deal. There's a lot of new research out that's revealing that there's a lot of problems in this combination of kidneys and fluoride. They don't get together well at all. They can never be friends. The National Kidney Foundation no longer endorses water fluoridation. Actually, they recommend notifying all fluoride consumers of potential dangers of fluoride. That would mean putting a notice in the water bill or water announcement that goes out however often that you put them out. I would encourage Mercer Island to look at the new research that's come out on fluoride. It's really worth looking at. And I would encourage Mercer Island to declare a 1-year moratorium on water fluoridation. And I'm really glad you guys have paid attention to us. I thank you so much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council?
My name is Bill Wise. I live in Bellevue at 16057 Northeast 6th Street. And I just thank you for having us here. I've been known for years how bad fluoride is. About a decade ago, I put RO system in for our drinking water in our house. But fluoride and lead and arsenic don't just kill anybody suddenly at the levels it appears in the drinking water, but it does make us weaker and sicker and more susceptible to other kinds of physical problems. About 50% of the fluoride taken by adults is retained in the bones and in the calcium-rich joints, tendons, muscles, and organs such as the thyroid. With babies and children, around 80% is retained. Kidneys in babies and children are not yet fully developed, so we don't part of the program here. The mental element in babies is much more serious than the physical. It's not acceptable to say that we're only drinking a small amount of fluoride, lead and arsenic, and there's nothing to worry about because first, the body has a hard time excreting them, and second, fluoride, lead, and arsenic accumulate in the body. The body has difficulty excreting them, and the healthy adult only excretes half of the fluoride. and arsenic consumed, a baby or an ill or aged person or one with kidney disease excretes even less. And if you've lived on water with fluorides right along, by the time you're in your mid-40s, your bones are over 5,000 parts per million fluoride. That makes you ache, it makes you tend to gain weight, slow down, it worsens diabetes and kidney problems. And by the time in one's 70s, bones contain 12,000 parts per million for fluoride. And bones become chalky, hips break. If you've never known any elderly lady who's broke a leg just stepping off of a step stool, I have. I don't know whether she was on the fluoride water or not, but sometimes it says that Granny fell down and broke her hip. Just as often, Granny breaks a hip and then falls down. That fluoride binds with aluminum, transports aluminum across the blood-brain barrier, which the aluminum worsens Alzheimer's symptoms. All these effects are cumulative and set in gradually. Our health is eroded, and for some, life may even be shortened. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council? Okay, seeing none, we will close public appearances and go on to the minutes. We have 2 minutes. Would someone like to make a motion, please?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, with both of them then?
For both, please.
Okay, so we have July
Mayor Perrin,
18th.
I'm sorry, can I ask that we do separate motions?
Okay.
Thanks.
I think that's
Okay.
the motion.
Then, Councilmember Grady, I assume your motion is for the July 18, 2011.
That it is, Mr.
Okay, do we have a second? Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, do we have the second motion?
For the second set of minutes, Mr. Mayor.
That would I assume would be August 1st, 2011. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Our consent calendar, we have 3 items. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Jim, I'd like to take item 5 and 6 off the consent calendar.
Okay, 5 and 6 will turn into our first items under regular business. That leaves us with payables and payroll. Do we have a motion to accept those? So moved. Second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, we're on to regular business, and we'll start out with Agenda Bill 4669, the Verizon Cellular Site Lease. And Dan?
Yeah, I just, I guess, first, so I understand the economics of this thing. The $1,600 per month, how does that compare to the last one we did, Katie?
It's $500 a month over the last one we did. The last one we did was $1,140.
Okay. And I noticed in this one, and maybe it's been in all of them, basically that the lessee has the right to terminate this thing at any time? That's the way it's always been?
They've all been the same, and do you know what section that's at?
It's in...
7.
It's Section 7. It says 7D, by lessee if it determines in its sole discretion that it will be unable to use the premises for its intended purpose.
After 60 days written notice, correct.
Right. So that basically, they can walk at any time if they decide that they don't want it anymore.
Correct.
That's the way it's always been.
Yes.
Okay. The other thing is there's an email we all received from Bob Bursos this past week. What about Bob? which Bob asked, I thought, a fascinating question, and I know that staff has looked into it since then. And for the benefit of everybody, Bob's question was whether we should require, as part of these cell towers, that there be some emergency power capability there, so that in the event of a blackout, that we would have the ability to still communicate on the island by cell phones, and I surely don't understand it from an engineering standpoint, but maybe staff can illuminate this.
I did some research and just quick background. After Katrina, the FCC has been trying to push for mandating backup generation on cell phone towers. That since 2006, that hasn't happened. But what we're looking at is the opportunity to be able to do that here. The challenge ends up being the network for cellular communications is larger than Mercer Island. So whatever we could put in place for backup generation, we need to talk to our neighbors, see what they can do, what they're doing. Ends up being more of a regional emergency management issue. There is an opportunity to do that. Other two questions are, what time period are we looking at? 8-hour backup, 24-hour backup. Many of the existing towers have battery generation backup. Some have a diesel power backup. They try and maintain a system that's functional even through emergencies, but the question is who's putting that in check, and I think that's an opportunity for us to be able to look at that.
So, for example, on this tower, do we know what kind of backup they're proposing? Or I don't think that's provided for in the lease, or maybe it's in an exhibit. So is there any backup on this one?
We wouldn't know that, but we can find that out, and I'd be curious to see what we have on existing facilities. So,
I mean, it would strike me that at a minimum, and maybe we can talk. We've got another agenda bill coming up where we're talking about the ordinance on locating cell towers. But you would think at a minimum we'd want to at least have some sort of plug-in capability there, so that if you could at least bring a generator to the cell tower to enable to activate it. Even I can understand the difficulty of actually keeping a generator on site, because then you've got to supposedly test it every month or whatever you'd have to do to make sure it keeps operating. But at least you have a plug-in that you could bring a generator in there.
I would defer to your original comment, which is, what's the technology, what's the need, and all those type of things, because we need to look at what the zoning requirements would be, whether permanent or temporary. You've got things that you'd be bringing onto sites that in some cases are residential neighborhoods or commercial areas where you've got diesel, you've got batteries that have, based on the MSDS requirements on them, may be an issue. So let us do some research, and we can get back with what the standards are for the industry, what the recommendations we would have for our cellular communications.
So are you suggesting that that's going to be an agenda item rolling forward on this?
Well, what I was going to suggest, Mike, is that when we get to the Design Commission agenda bill, that staff, when they before they come back on second reading, come back with some more information on that, because that would be an appropriate place to potentially put in language in that very ordinance that is, I mean, I realize it has nothing to do with the issue whether the Design Commission should review it or not review it, but it happens to be that ordinance talks about cell towers and where they're to be located, and presumably if Katie tells us we legally can require it, could say that every cell tower needs to have some sort of emergency power capability. If that's what staff concludes is something we would want to do.
I think Councilmember Grau's idea of just a plug-in, just the ability to have a plug-in, I mean, I think that's huge strides forward, and that takes care of the MSDS issues that you brought up and whatnot. Is there a separate 911 system?
I'm not quite sure about it. As we talked earlier in the evening, one of the suggestions I had in talking with our emergency officer, Jennifer Franklin, is the thought, as James Mason also brought up too, is that we come back with you and provide you information whether on 911. I know that there's some requirements that all the communication providers have to do to deal with 911 issues that are separate and apart from these actual leases. These are just the leases to place the poles in certain areas. And then the other aspect that I hear council asking about is looking towards, again, I think a bigger picture, what sort of backup energy and backup we have for these communication devices. I think that's actually a bigger picture than just perhaps this lease. And I think it's something that we'd like to investigate and bring back to council perhaps as its own package if you'd like, so we could talk then about what might be the next best step. One of the things that Jennifer Franklin has worked on quite a bit with other jurisdictions is regard to how services and such are provided to Mercer Island. And I think I think we can get to the concerns based on some things she's already put into place already, what we might already have as backup, and that'll just take us a little time to put together and bring back to council.
I don't have any other questions on this,
Okay.
please.
Would you like
Can I
to?
ask a question?
Certainly.
James, in looking at the agenda bill, I didn't see how tall is this cell facility? Is it specified anywhere?
It should be in the, I don't know, George, do you know how tall it is?
I didn't see it anyplace in the documents.
That's a good question.
So,
we can come back on
question,
that.
is this going to be added to an existing tower?
No, this is, they're building their own pole, and it's on, I want to say it's the playfields. There's some issue.
South of the playfield, it
Right.
looks like from the map, but it doesn't specify any place that I can see the size. We see the map of the location, but not the dimensions.
I know that, and George, you can help me out with this too, if you wouldn't mind, that they're limited on what size poles they can put up, and if my recall on this was that there were no concerns with that within the Design Commission review of this particular matter, this particular pole.
That's correct.
So whatever the limits are
It's not
within
taller
the...
than anything we already have,
Correct.
presumably. Okay.
Exactly.
That was my concern.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, move to authorize the city manager to enter into a telecommunications site lease with Verizon Wireless for a wireless communication facility to be located at 8660 Southeast 60th Street.
Second?
I'll second that.
Okay, moved and second. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, moving on to Agenda Bill 4664, interlocal with Mercer Island School District for school counseling services. Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood how this fit in within the budget, Chip. Is this the 60,000 we're getting from the district and the 362 from Mercer Island? That's all part of the budget, and
Yes, that's correct.
how does that vary from the last year? I guess we did 100% previously, and
No, a year ago, we did 60, or they paid us 60,000 as well. It was, I think, the year prior to that.
okay.
It was a different arrangement.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Okay, do we have a motion then? Dan?
Go ahead, Al.
I'll move to authorize city manager to sign the interlocal agreement with the Mercer Island School District Counseling Services for the Mercer Island School District Counseling Services during the 2011-2012 school year.
Second?
Okay, moved and second. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye. 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 Opposed? Great, thank you. Moving on then to Agenda Bill 4665. This is the first reading. And George, you're on deck.
Great. For the record, my name is George Steyer. I'm a principal planner. I'll quickly go through the current regulations on this and the proposed regulations, and then I'll introduce Emmett Malouf, the Design Commission Chair, to speak on the Design Commission experience on this. So quickly, as you may recall, this agenda bill item came at the request of the Design Commission after City Council had put this on our work program for this year. The current regulations say that if you've got a minor exterior modification within the town center, the Design Commission reviews it. If you have a minor exterior modification outside the town center, then the code official reviews it. The one exception is if the code official determines that that minor exterior modification is deemed significant, then the code official has the authority to bump that up to the Design Commission. And the reason that's important is because that would stay the same. So under the current proposal, we would change minor exterior modifications to the code official if it's inside the town center. But that authority to bump that up to the Design Commission if it's deemed significant would stay in place.
George, will you go back to the original one and define the terms that you're using, i.e. minor exterior and significant?
Yeah, it's in the agenda bill, but I can skip ahead to, let me skip ahead real quick to the end here that defines it right here. So minor exterior modification is anything that does not constitute major new construction. I love that definition. Points you to another one. construction from the bare ground, I'm going to paraphrase here, that costs in excess of 50% of the structure's assessed value and excludes single-family developments. So I think that gets to the...
So I thought that was a lot, the 50%, so 49% of a value structure in the town center. I mean, a town center structure is very expensive, and so you're saying that...
Some are, yeah.
Let's hold questions until he's through, then we can hit him with everything we got, okay?
Well, it's just you have to understand these definitions whenever you see the formulas that he's... Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you.
Where I was going next, thank you, was to introduce Emmett Malouf to talk about the experiences of the Design Commission.
Thanks, George. Emmett Malouf, 4835 Forest Avenue, Southeast, Mercer Island. I think the whole crux kind of revolves around that the code official has the option to up it to the Design Commission. But I wanted, did we get that slide, George, of the two Starbucks ones?
Yeah.
Okay, this one is this freestanding Starbucks that's on 27th as you kind of go around the corner. And if you can look at the little red circle, all that canopy was designed to do was to keep rain off people that are trying to order a latte. It was extremely minor. I don't think that it's value added to try and have the Design Commission review something like that. I would say that that's something that is even far too easy for the code official to review. Why don't you put the other one up? This one was another one on the freestanding. It's just basically a redesign of the existing canopy, very, very minor modifications. The other one that started me with this idea was a condominium on Mercer Island up behind Monaco Villa had their garage door wear out. The reason that it wore out, it was a garage door designed for a private residence, and they estimated that the thing went up and down between 11 and 15,000 times a year, just wore out. Well, these guys had to come and make a presentation to the Design Commission, and my thought is, our value added is not in fire. You got to be able to get out when the power goes down. You got to be able to get out if that garage door is down. Safety, that's for the police, safety people to decide. You've got to be able to keep the bad guys out. It doesn't have anything to do with design, and it's something that the code official should be able to judge whether or not it fits. We have no value added. It's just a waste of time, a waste of city resources, a waste of city electricity. Anyhow, that's all I had. And I think you have to decide if your staff that you have in this. I know Mike was concerned about gee, that's a huge amount, up to 50%. But these guys, if you don't have any faith in these guys to know, they shouldn't be working here. So anyhow, that's all I got. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with that, talk about the alternatives or the actions you have. I might be out of a job. I don't know. We'll see. So the alternatives we have is obviously no action. You can move to deny this, or you can move this to second reading with or without changes, as you're aware. In the agenda bill, there's a proposed motion there. And if we move this to second reading, it would be before the City Council on October 17th. And with that, I'm happy to answer the barrage.
Okay, before the questions, this is a public hearing. We're going to open it up for the public. If anyone would like to come forward and have a comment, please give your name and address. You have 3 minutes. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Now we'll bring it back to the council.
I have a question.
Okay, I think Mike and then Jane. How's that? Okay.
George, it appears that we have an issue with the definitions of minor exterior modification or major new construction, and that seems to be what's tripping this thing up. Because I understand, the Starbucks example, but there have got to be a lot of them that fall in between that and the 49%, which I have to say I'm a little bit queasy about sending all that to the code official. So is there a way we can maybe reach some better understanding of minor exterior modification?
I think there's a couple options. One of them, and just kind of thinking off the cuff here, one of them might be, we could say major new construction is, 50% from the bare ground, if it's, or the assessed value. If you're outside the town center, inside the town center, it might be a dollar value, for example, or a total amount of additional gross floor area, or something like that.
Okay. Jane?
Yeah, my question has to do with, what about modifications relating to signage? Is that included in this?
Yeah, that's a great question. That would be included. So
Any change in signage would then, what, go to the design commission, or what happens
not
to
any.
signs?
There's certain exemptions. If you're just changing out the faceplate, for example, you're leaving it in the same place. There's no new structure. It's not more than 50% of the value, for example, then yeah, that could be exempt from design review. If you've got a new sign in a new location, say a new monument sign, then that would be a minor exterior modification. So it would have to meet the current sign ordinances and sign requirements. That would be reviewed by staff under the proposal by the Design Commission and the Planning Commission.
Any other questions? Mike?
Well, the examples that Emmett showed, I mean, I don't understand either why that had to go to the Design Commission. But, and one to tend to give the individual owners more flexibility to go with the code, I'm typically supportive of that. But costing 49%, when you go up to 49%, that seems like could be a very, very substantial change that would have tripped the Design Commission much prior to the 49%, much prior to the 50%. And that was a statement, and that was inappropriate. I should have made it.
Thank you for recognizing that.
But the intent was.
I have a question in there.
The intent was that this is the first reading, and that he'll take note of it for the second reading.
Can you rephrase that as a
duly noted, for sure.
It's kind of like Jeopardy. Yeah. Bruce, did you have something?
Mike well pointed out, I was about to make another statement, so I'm really glad he caught himself, and I'm going to wait.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, now it's time for statements. Okay. Bruce, you want to start out?
All I'm going to say is that I comments from Jane and Mike resonate with me. I think small changes, I'm all for having those not sit before the Design Commission. But there's not just small, there's also degree of visibility, and that's this, if it could be inexpensive, but it could be really out there, and I think we would want Design Commission to weigh in those cases, rather than say, well, it doesn't amount to X percent of the value of the building, and therefore doesn't fall within this. So my feedback would be that I'd be looking for something a little more nuanced than just a lower percentage of value.
Bruce, I understand your point. It's a good point. The challenge we have, the problem we have is nuance does not work well in an ordinance, and it's got to be objective. And coming up with an objective standard, whether it's 5% or 50%, is a challenge. And value is the one that everybody is settled on, apparently. There might be other metrics besides value, maybe size, but that's the problem we're looking at here. How do you come up with some definition that is not nuanced, that is objective?
Dan?
I agree with Al that you can't do this, but I think that argues maybe to not change the law and leave it as it is, and then, but just, the issue, it seems to me to be that they have to present the exact same information to the Design Commission that they have to present to the code official, whoever the applicant is. And the Design Commission can deal with it as quickly as the code official can deal with it. Because I agree that it's going to be very difficult to say how to nuance this thing. I mean, you could put a 5% value in there on that Starbucks, and if they had done something absolutely wild and put in bright flashing lights and yeah, we would hope that the code official would not approve something like that, but that is why we have a body of citizens who live on the island and who ultimately we believe are sensitive to what the other citizens on the island are sensitive to from an aesthetic standpoint. A lot of these issues that come up that are decided upon by the Design Commission are very much aesthetic considerations. They're not susceptible to objective standards. It's Design Commission sitting there and saying what is aesthetically acceptable, and that is not an objective criteria. So it may be the issue here is not so much who's making the decision, but how. Yeah, when I was liaison to the Design Commission a while back, I think the hardest thing with this watch was that staff would put together these huge presentations before the Design Commission, and the applicant would have these huge reports, and clearly, if you can have a much more streamlined procedure so that all you're presenting to the Design Commission is exactly what you'd present to the code official, then this is not that an onerous a situation for the Design Commission.
Let me jump in here with a question that this discussion has prompted in my mind, and that's the owner of ABC building downtown wants to repaint, and he's choosing to repaint in hot pink. How is that covered in our practice and in our code? Who would rule on such a proposal, or in fact, does the city control what color you can paint your building? How do we do that now? Because that is obviously aesthetic, and a paint job certainly comes in at less than 50% of assessed value. How do we do it now?
Currently, the code says if you're repainting a building, that would be subject to design review. However, there's an exemption clause. If you're painting it to a similar color, then the code official has the authority to determine it's not significant and is exempt from design review altogether.
If I could ask George or Emmett to talk a little bit, because Dan made the comment that the amount of effort is the same whether it's going to the code official or to the Design Commission, and I think you might differ with that, and so I wanted you to have an opportunity to speak to just what the degree of difficulty is in taking it to the Design Commission. As the liaison of the Design Commission, I know that these days Design Commission tends to be pretty quiet, and oftentimes they all get called out for only one issue, and that one issue, if it's just a trellis for a Starbucks, it does seem kind of a shame from my perspective that we've rallied that group of citizen volunteers to spend an evening to weigh in on something as minor as that. And George, maybe the staff time involved in that too you could help with.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about the staff time and see what Chairman Loof has to say about it as well. From a staff resources, we could quantitatively show that there is a significant more amount of staff time involved in bringing it to the Design Commission. Not just the fact of staff trying to get everything together, the agendas and the staff report. There's actually another staff report because you have Design Commission findings that have to be signed, so we have to draft that up too. And getting that together, and then staff time at the Design Commission as well. But also, you have to do a public notice on there, and anytime there's a public notice, we do such a great job of doing that. You guys don't get to see all the work behind the scenes of doing that. So it's like, hey, just bring this forward. But there's a lot of staff time, and I would estimate there's probably at least 6 to 8 hours to get that meeting ready at a minimum. So I know everyone would agree there's significant more amount of staff time involved.
I'd like to comment, too, that I spoke with Terry Mormon of the Chamber today and was talking to her about this, and she feels strongly that anything that would be less intimidating to a small retailer, less time-consuming, require, fewer people to prepare. Sometimes people bring in their lawyers and all that. Anything to encourage the small retailers and to make the process easier would be really welcome by people not only who are in business now, but those who might think of coming in and opening a business on Mercer Island. I think it's intimidating to go before a commission, and it's a much bigger deal to a small business person than it is to go to a code official. So, I think it is a quantum leap, and I guess that's what I wanted to point out.
Any other comments? I'll weigh in real quick. I think that this is a good idea, but it sounds like the definition of what minor is or what that looks like needs to be worked on a little bit. So the comfort level of getting to where I think you want to go is going to be easy for the council to accept, right? So in other words, you're not going to do something, it's not going to be a big reach, and then people are going to go, how in the world did that happen? Well, we basically said no design review, and it was just done, right? I think that's the risk.
That is, it's Emmett Maloof again, yeah. That is definitely the risk, but I think you just have to count on common sense of your city staff. I just don't think you can define it. I mean, make it 25%. I agree with you that 50% sounds, or 49% sounds pretty big, but you can do stuff with 5%, like you were describing, that's absolutely absurd. I remember when Baskin & Robbins was painted hot pink.
Mm-hmm. And Taco Loco was a very big deal, remember?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the problem that I see is people are not perfect, and the Design Commission is not perfect. And it seems to me that the architects have to put their own stamp on things. And I mean, I've seen so much where we don't keep our eye on the ball. I think some of it had some consternation went all the way back up to your level, where I know the people that were replacing this garage door, all of a sudden we took off after the fact that we didn't like the landscaping on the driveway. This isn't minor, but the beach club, they were putting in a pool. They were making it narrower and longer so it was Olympic length. And all of a sudden we're talking about the canopies at the entrances, and we're talking about the height of the hood and duct system, and we're not keeping our eye on the ball just because we have to put our stamp on it. The park and ride lot, one of the architects suggested that we should raise the two lights up at the entranceway. When he was asked why, he said, so it'll mark the entrance. And my personal feeling was, I'm sure somebody's going to be driving along North Mercer Way, and he sees that light up there, but he doesn't know that's the entrance. So he just drives up over the curb and across the sidewalk and tries to find an entryway in there. I mean, some of this stuff, to me, is absolutely... But architects want to put their own mark on things, and it tends to make these things, even when we had wireless facilities, which we're going to talk about a bit, used to have to have an above ground box for the equipment. And the recommendations, it was like, I'd have to go home and have a double martini before I could get anywhere near going to bed. But anyway, again, I think you have to rely on the common sense of staff. And you have a fine staff here. You really do. And I don't think you have to nail it down to a percentage or a number of square feet or something like that. I think everybody knows. Kind of like porn. It's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. So.
I won't touch that. Okay, so anyway, anyone else have comments? Yeah. Mike?
So we know that.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the comments from Chair Maloof and from George, but I do think that there needs to be some work on quantifying what the limits are, because everyone has common sense, but in order for the code official and for you folks on the design commission to understand where the overlap is and where your discretionary boundaries are, I think it's going to be helpful for us to bore in on this a little bit more. So I really do think coming up with some maybe both quantitative and qualitative definition of this minor modification definition would be very helpful. And that would certainly help with my comfort level. Go ahead. Take the podium.
Right. Emmett Mulligan. Are you thinking of a lower percentage, or are you thinking
Well, for instance, my guess is you guys probably talked about this, no more than 10% of square footage or assessed value or whatever, and some qualitative definition, like it doesn't alter the character or aesthetic character of the town center. Something where it would give me a little bit more comfort that, maybe George isn't the one that's going to make the call. Maybe someone else, brand new comes in as the code official. I think it's going to be helpful to have some guidelines, both quantitative and qualitative.
Okay, so something like maybe even running it by the design commission via email or some sort of
Yeah, we can't do that because of the
flagpole type
quorum
thing?
issue, but we could come up with some possible alternatives. I could work with the chair on this, if that's okay.
Okay.
And what I'm thinking, if you're okay with it, is some sort of square foot and value, either or.
George, let me bring it up to a high level, first of all.
Please.
On the council, is there interest in doing this? Just a general, before you tie it down, is there
Doing
interest? What they're proposing here, that basically not everything's going to go through the design commission. There's going to be staff interpretation of minor, whatever that is. Is there interest in that? Save staff time and all that. Okay, I'm hearing that. Okay, the next question is, I'm hearing from people here that there is concern about, what does that mean?
Mr. Mayor.
Right, well, just let me ask, the question is, we have staff in the room, and we've got Tim, who's been to a lot of different cities, and I'm sure this isn't new, and I'm sure this isn't new for a lot of other cities, and they can find a lot of examples out there. If we were to tell the staff at this point to go back in the second reading and come back with more clarifying language and tighten it down a little bit, is that good for the council?
So I guess, Your Honor, what you're suggesting is getting more specific on the definition of minor exterior modification, and
Correct.
more specific, and, as Mike Grady is saying, both quantitatively and qualitatively, if that can be done on an objective basis.
Right.
I think what's going to happen, though, is any dollar amount or square footage amount, you're going to have the concern, the council or council members will have the concern that you're going to get the Pink Flamingo building or something of that, which may lend itself to wording of in line or consistent with existing architecture, something to that effect.
It appears to me, I hear what Mike is saying, but it appears to me that there could be, and probably is, a lot of language out there that could protect from those kind of things happening.
A Pink Flamingo building sounds significant to me. We'd probably bump that up.
We're not as good at all.
Okay, is that pretty good? So a second reading would come back, and we get staff to report back on that? Okay, is there anything else?
I would like to suggest that the staff focus on defining minor exterior rather than major new construction. Say what it is rather than what it is not. Including but not limited to awnings, paint-colored doors, windows, that kind of thing, instead of giving a dollar amount, perhaps.
Okay, so you basically want it more prescriptive than less prescriptive. You want it pretty tight.
Well, focusing on what minor
The definition,
is rather
right.
than what major is not.
Is that what the rest of the council, how do you feel about that? Tighten it down?
I'd leave staff the latitude to really
Okay.
go and check and see what they find rather than trying to tighten it down on staff right now.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, having none, George, can you try to tell us what you heard?
I heard a lot.
Yeah, it's
But the
important.
main point I heard was trying to come up with some sort of objective criteria for what would be reviewed for a minor exterior modification by the code official in the town center, and when it would not be minor.
Okay. Is that what we said? Okay.
Okay.
Great, thanks, George. Super. All right, we're going to move on then. We've got Agenda Bill 4666, and this is another first reading. Okay, and I get my paperwork in order. And Tim Stewart. And we have George again?
Yep.
Okay, George.
Just a point of order, so we don't have to do a motion on that?
Not on first reading, I don't believe. Do we need a first? We don't need a motion on first reading, no. Okay, George, the floor is yours.
Just for the record, George Steyer, Principal Planner on this. So I'll try to go in the same order, a little bit faster this time, though. This is obviously a summary of the ordinance is shift the authority for wireless communication facilities, or WCFs, from the Design Commission to the code official, and just designate it as a wireless communication facility permit, WCF permit. There would be the same noticing requirements under this proposal and the same detailed standards. We're not proposing to change any of those standards in the ordinance. A little background on this. Obviously, this came from the Design Commission again. City Council had put this on our work program, so staff is bringing it forward. And as I'll talk about more here, the design standards are very prescriptive, and we could look at that in a minute. Here are a couple WCFs that we see that are typical. You'll see them on utility poles if you look there. The one on the left, it's on I-90 there. It's in the bushes. I try to adjust the color best as possible, but it typically blends in.
Is that the one disguised as a tree?
No, that one is...
Hey, wait a minute. When we get to the next agenda, Bill, I want to know if they have to go to the Design Commission.
Well, wait a minute. No, I was going to suggest that was a Stanford mascot.
Moving on. Okay, so these are very prescriptive standards. We'll take a look at a couple of them real quick, which is if we take a map of Mercer Island and we overlay the locations where they're allowed in red, we can see it's not subjective at all. It's very objective of where they are allowed on Mercer Island. We can also look at the height requirements. This is just a summary of the height requirements, but you look at the different zones and what the maximum height is of buildings or the utilities in that location, and we can add on the antennas in those locations and see. Again, it's very prescriptive, it's very detailed. There's a numeric standard for that as well. There's other numeric standards, and I won't go into all of them, but the setbacks from the edge of the buildings, the vaults have got to be underground or screened whenever feasible. Number of antennas to determine that the site is full, for example. The size of antennas on Island Crest Way. Those are all regulated and very prescriptive. Another thing that we'll hear, and I'll have Emmett Malouf talk about this a little bit as well, is that the FCC says under federal regulations, the city, we can't look at the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions, which is something we'll hear about, but we cannot consider that under federal authority there. So with that, I'll introduce Emmett again to talk about the Design Commission experience.
For the record, Emmett Malouf again. I guess in the last, what have I been on there, 6 years? Everything's been underground, and the only thing that I see is we're going to take an existing pole, where there'd be a electrical pole, usually it's an electrical pole, and we're going to make it taller so that we can put a facility on it. And everybody complains about having that pole in their front yard, but it's already there. It's just taller. One gentleman, I happen to know this gentleman, and they were going to run the pole up from, I think it was 70 feet to 110 feet, and if he was standing in his picture window, he could see the top of it, but after they raised it, he'd have to get down on his hands and knees to see the top of it. And he was really complaining that he wanted that pole taken out of there, really because of the frequency emissions. Everybody, you hear it over and over and over. They try to disguise it every which way because we kind of announce it at the beginning that emissions is not within our purview, but that's what takes hours and hours and hours, is having people complain about something that we can't do anything about. So I think there was a place for it to be up to the Design Commission when we had a lot of above ground stuff and landscaping to talk about, But now that everything's underground, and usually it's going on an already existing pole that might be made a little bit taller, it really doesn't seem like there's very much value added that we can add. As George says, it's very, very prescriptive. There's very little leeway that we might have to do anything.
Thank you. So again, the alternatives that the City Council has: take no action, approve the Planning Commission proposal with or without changes, or eliminate the requirement for a permit for WCFs and review it at the building permit process, just like you do on a single-family house, which is regulated with setbacks and heights and areas that they're allowed as well. The recommended motion is in there. It's moved to second reading, and if we go to second reading, it would come back to you October 17th. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
This is a public hearing, so I'm going to open it up for public comment. The public hearing is now open. Would anyone like to address the City Council on this matter? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Now I'll bring it back to the council for questions. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. George, the picture that you showed where you are very prescriptive on where the towers can go, that one right there. So what is the process to change that, to enlarge that footprint?
It would be a code text amendment, and I'll check with our city attorney on this one, but since we haven't advertised that we were proposing to change the locations, I believe we would have to re-advertise that, go through SEPA again, go through the Planning Commission, and then come back to City Council with that code text changed.
That was my only concern. That great.
Bruce?
In my experience as the liaison to the Design Commission, I have observed their frustration in the narrowness of the number of things that they can address, and I do think it boils down, as Emmett has said, virtually entirely to landscaping. And so, George, I'm looking to you. Is there more than landscaping that they do have responsibility for? And I'm forgetting.
The Design Commission?
Yes.
In my opinion, everything else is so prescriptive. Because you only location is prescribed, the height is prescribed, the vault has to be underground unless it's not feasible. Then you have to screen it, and the screening is fairly prescriptive too. It talks about trees on center and all that other stuff, and so I can't think of anything else.
So if we made this change, should we fear then that staff would have different criteria they'd place, looser criteria they'd place on applicants than the Design Commission does, such that we sort of feel like we got gypped on our landscaping on future cell sites versus having these go to the Design Commission?
Well, I don't anticipate that happen. I'll mention why. The only place you'll see landscaping is either in the parks, and our park staff, planning staff works closely with the Parks Department to make sure we get enough landscaping in there, or in the right-of-way. And so we'll try to make sure they'll plant more than what they've disturbed in there.
So,
no, I don't anticipate
expect
that.
The outcome would be essentially the same?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, George, I'd asked you this before. Is there a reason why certain things go to Superior Court for review on appeal, or things go to the hearing examiner? Why we picked this one to go to Superior Court rather than the hearing examiner?
Yeah, I think we were just trying to follow the Design Commission, what was happening with the Design Commission, which is it would go to Superior Court. We're trying to do propose minimal changes as possible. If City Council would like to see that this appeals to the hearing examiner, I think as staff we would support that. It just saves them a step of going to Superior Court. More local appeal authority, sure.
I'm just, from a time standpoint, I assume it's a far more expeditious appeal to the hearing examiner than it is to Superior Court?
Generally.
And
we
then,
think so. We prefer it.
And that similarly, if a citizen wanted to appeal it, going to a code official, going to the hearing examiner rather than Superior Court would make it easier for them to do so.
And less expensive as well.
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't focused on that before I read the agenda bill, but I know that's not the subject matter of this, but is there any staff preference on this thing, or is this?
Well, from the city attorney's office, we'd prefer the hearing examiner. About DSG?
Yeah, we'd support this hearing examiner as well. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, no questions, then we'll bring it back for speeches. Okay. Anyone like to start out?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I call you about it on my cell phone? Yeah. I mean, there are so many dead zones on this island. It is pathetic. But be that as it may, I do think that changing the appeal to the hearing examiner would make sense. The other thing that I mentioned before in the context of the Verizon lease, I really, before this thing comes back again, 'cause there's clearly no urgency on this change, and as long as we're tinkering with this ordinance, I'd love for staff to come back to us before second reading and tell us whether Bob's idea is possible to be added as one of the criteria for approving these things going forward. And that's, I'm not prejudging this, because let staff come back and tell us whether there's any legs to that idea.
Any other comments?
I agree with them.
Anything else?
I think it's a good idea, and I think this is something that should definitely come back for second reading, and it seems to make sense to have the code official decide, rather than go to the design commission.
Great. Any other comments? Now, I would just say with Irene and what's going on, if you follow that, I know that telecommunications has been a big, big deal, and I know that FEMA and everyone is doing that, and I'm sure that I would be personally interested to hear from the companies what their plan is, because they're probably already addressing this on a company-wide basis already. So it'd be interesting to hear what they're saying. Okay, with that, we'll close it down for comments. What I'm hearing is that there's interest into directing, if there's questions about the ordinance, to go to a hearings examiner rather than Superior Court, and then also Bob's idea of the backup power being researched and what that looks like and what's being done. And was there anything else? Okay. With that, then, we'll just move it on to the second reading. Great. Thanks, George. Okay. Now we have the agenda item that Councilmember Grady's been we're just waiting for all night, huh? Here we go. Okay. We have Agenda Bill 4659, and we have James Mason who's be presenting this. George, thanks a lot. You did a great job tonight.
It is not on here. That's okay. We don't need this.
Oh, and Emmett, thank you so much. I failed to thank you.
The purpose of the agenda bill this evening is to request council authorization for $80,000 of grant funding to go towards the design, purchase, and installation of electric vehicle charging stations. So we have 3 locations where we'll be looking at putting in 6 stations altogether, 2 at each location, at City Hall, at the Community Center, and at the Mercer Island School District, between Mercer Island School District and Peak. In 2010, we received grant funding approval from the Department of Commerce through the Department of Energy. So the Department of Energy provided the grant to the Washington State Department of Commerce. We received $135,000 approval. $25,000 of that was to go towards electric charging stations. We also received a grant approval from Clean Cities through the Department of Energy for an unknown amount. We've waited through last year and finally got our approval and amount on the end of June, which was $45,000. At that same time, we had put in a request for turnback funds. There was some grant funding that was out there that wasn't used, so we requested that. And the main reason we did that, through the last year, there's been a lot of changes in both the legislation and in what's been available as far as charging stations. When we started this whole process, there were two units available, two manufacturers of charging units, really, that were out on the market. We're looking at somewhere between 5 and 6 that are available now from a wide variety of commercial and residential applications. In that time period, the second grant, we had to wait for our authorization to be able to know how much we could spend on those. Those units, when we were starting this whole process, were in about the $6,000 range, and most of them have been cut in half as far as what those costs are, depending on what you add to that.
$3,000.
Closer to $3,000. So between 3 and 4 is where most of them are right now. So the other thing is the installation companies and their familiarity with these products and putting them in has also added some benefits to us. When we started this, I wanted to put together a budget to define what it would take to put these in, and our initial request was $25,000. Well, given the cost of the units, 6 units at $6,000 each, $25,000 didn't even buy us the units. On top of that, when we were looking at installation, a good example, I think the Sustainability Committee is familiar with this. Just the community center, the installation, we were looking at preliminary quotes were probably about $40,000 or $50,000 for infrastructure and being able to just be able to provide the units. And the reason being, we've got a whole parking lot of saw cutting and access to the meters and everything else. In that process, they've become a little bit more a better understanding of the industry and what can be done to be able to make this happen. Have a more refined budget. We have more money through the grants, and what we're looking at right now that we have funding available to spend, asking for your approval for that. Right now we have a design company ready to go forward with the design, have an RFP ready to hit the streets after this approval for solicitation for those units, and once we have the design back, we'll be able to do the installation. We're looking at all that to be completed probably beginning mid-November, maybe sooner, but given all the time criteria that's been given to us to go through the process of bid solicitation. And that's probably the biggest issue. Through federal requirements, there's a lot of things that we normally wouldn't do the type of requests for proposals that we need to do in this, but the federal requirements are a little bit more stringent. Any questions?
Great. Questions for James? Yeah. Al? I got a couple, James. Number one, who pays for the electricity on these units?
The way this works, we will pay for that, but I need to qualify that. These units...
Wait, who's we?
The city.
Even when it's over at the school district in peak?
Yes.
So ultimately...
For 2 years. For 2 years, they belong to us. But let me qualify that. And the way it works is charging stations, the charge to use the station, what you'll pay to use the station is for that session. The session charge will exceed what the electricity charge is. So
the user pays.
The user pays through exactly. We're reimbursed through the company.
So a user pays.
The user pays
to a company who
pays a session.
us for
Correct.
Our costs. And I guess the other one is you just mentioned these units are $3,000 or $4,000, and the budget here is $29,700 for 6 of these. That's like $5,000 a unit.
Just I want to be able to have some cushion in there.
Need to spend the whole $80,000, huh?
Not necessarily. I can maybe be able to put in new units. There are some things that add to that. Things like vandal-proofing, locking holsters, that what you charge your car with. There's units that are available that until you either swipe a card or put in a code, that holster won't come out. So there's a lot of add-ons. I just wanted to be sure that we were covered for.
Questions? Yeah, Mike?
I think I have two. On the schematic, it looks like you're putting them on handicap places.
No. I put a handicap spot for each unit. So one unit will be a regular parking space, one will be a ADA accessible space.
So does that mean that it's limited to ADA placard vehicles?
No.
So does that mean that a EV vehicle is taking up an ADA spot?
No. And actually, the code hasn't been defined for that yet. The way it's being built is to be able to have enough space so if someone wants to use that space, it's ADA accessible.
Okay, so I want to be very clear on this. If the CCMV has 3 ADA spaces,
yeah.
If it has 3 ADA spaces, this EV space will not be one of those 3.
Correct. This will not take away any spaces.
It will be a 4th space that is dedicated to EV, but also has the accessibility for ADA.
Correct.
Okay. I want to ask to Councilmember Jenke's question again. Taxpayers will not have to pay any of the electricity being used for this through the reimbursement process.
Anyone who uses a charge will pay for a session.
And the session will fully cover the electricity charge.
Correct.
Okay.
I got you.
The next question I have is just the theory, if you go in placing these EVs, and I noticed they're placed at peak. They're placed at at the City Hall, which I'm comfortable with, and then they are placed at
Community Center.
At the community center. So I see the customer for the City Hall being employees, and that makes, because what's a session? How long does a session last?
A full session from zero charge is about 6 to 8 hours.
So that implies that we're going after employees, which would mean logically the City Hall would be a logical place for it. But the peak, there aren't that many employees at peak versus where teachers, where the employees who are going to stay for the 6 hours. Peak, they've only got a couple employees there. And then the same thing with the community center. We only have relatively couple employees at the community center. I mean, from an EV theory, I'm sure there's a graduate student that does that stuff. Does it make sense to put it in locations where there are few employees but a lot of transient people?
I can give you kind of the background of the methodology behind that.
Okay.
And the community center and City Hall, probably the highest tier reason is because it's proximity to I-90. If someone was stuck on I-90 and watched their charge go down, they would know the way these cars are being set up now. The GPS will tell you where the charging stations are as long as they're put in the system. So if you're on I-90 and you're stuck in traffic, your charge is going down, you can get off on Mercer Island and either get off on this end or the other end and be able to get to a charging station. And I talked to somebody just a couple months ago that ended up in that situation, and the availability to plug in just for an hour and a half was enough to get them back home and get them where they needed to go. So that's one. Two is both the community center and City Hall has a lot of regional visitors. We have city managers, planning staff, a lot of people that come here for meetings that are coming from around King County. And CCMV, same thing. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had requests from people using the CCMV that we would have charging stations there because there were people with electric vehicles that were going to meetings at CCMV and thought it would be very helpful for them. For the peak, it's the fact that it's between peak and the administration buildings. So if there are teachers that have an electric vehicle, there's that availability. But also understanding that Peak has sports activities that are happening, that people will be there for 2, 3, 4 hours at a time watching their kids play or for whatever reason. So there's an opportunity there for people to do that. And another reason that kind of covers all of this is visibility and opportunity for people to understand that there's infrastructure out there and be able to help the cost.
So in all seriousness, that acronym that was used for this, is that when we hear it in the papers, there it is, American Recovery and Reinvestment, is that the TARP? Is that TARP? Is this shovel-ready TARP?
Stimulus.
This is stimulus? Is this QE2?
No. QE2 is Federal Reserve action.
Okay, Mike? Thanks, James, for the presentation and all the hard work you put into this. Can you speak a little bit to the issue of signage, both in terms of signing at the site, but also wayfaring signage either on our streets or on I-90? Have you talked with Clean Cities folks, et cetera, to be able to use some of this money or additional monies to be able to get signage for this?
The money that we have, I don't believe that we can use for signage, but we have had conversations with them about, because there's more funds that have come on the table specifically for signage.
Good.
And there are requirements, there are RRA requirements that both for the locations that they are marked to identify that they've been paid through Reinvestment Act funds, and also being able to put signage so people can find them. Probably the biggest element and that I'm seeing as far as what I'm reading on these units is that there's a real-time connection to being able to put where these are within the GPS system that's out there, because that's how people are going to find these more than anything else. They're going to look down at their smartphone or at their dashboard, and then you're going to want to know where these are, and it's important that we're in that system. And actually, when we started this whole process with the grant process and with the Puget Sound Regional Council, we submitted these sites specifically, so they are in the regional system as charging station sites.
So that was going to get to one of my other questions, was the interoperability of these stations that we're going to acquire. So regardless of what kind of electric car or truck I would want to purchase, there's interoperability with the plug to be able to access those and to charge either my car or truck.
That's actually a priority of what we selected as far as the criteria for the unit. There's only 2 units out there that have the ability to both do level 1 and level 2. So it's a single unit that you can plug in 2 vehicles and 2 different types of plugs. So that's everything from a police electric bike to a scooter to old generation electric vehicles to the newest technology. So that was a priority.
Good. So you're getting to my other question. So this station has both level 1, meaning 110, so just like plugging in our garage, or 220, level 2 capability.
Correct.
Okay.
All 6 stations will have that.
Excellent. Back to the cost recovery issue. So are we going to need to come back with an agenda item on an ordinance to be able to charge citizens for those sessions, because those are stations that will be owned by the city? And I know in working with King County, they had to come up with a cost recovery mechanism and then bring it in front of their council.
You're talking maybe from a perspective of gift of public funds, or just
right?
You know.
Yeah. For instance, King County is charging $5 a session to access their charging stations, with the understanding that that covers any costs associated with the electricity, and then it also has a way to helpfully build back some of the ongoing maintenance costs for that particular station.
Really, my go-to person on that has been with Seattle and with Puget Sound Clean Air, and just defining what the standards are out there for that recovery. And I guess the background, really going back to what the charge is, this whole industry realized that doing a charge for electricity starts to bring in a utility and trade commission issue. You start utility rates, what's the charge for that? And that's why the shift has been to a charge for the use of a parking facility. Right. So it's basically a parking space charge. And what that final cost will be for us is yet to be determined, but we're kind of following the lead of the other communities of what's out there.
So you're going to charge people to use a parking space next to a free space?
But it's for the session of charging the vehicle. But the charge will be to that unit. If somebody just wants to park there.
So what you're saying is we can't call this a electricity charge. We make it a use charge which more than covers the cost of the electricity.
Can we do that with a straight face? I mean, that's preposterous. By any stretch of the imagination. You can park there, but if you happen to stick this thing in your car, then you got to pay us $5.
Why is that?
Right. Well, we haven't. It's my understanding we haven't settled on what the cost recovery formula is for Mercer Island.
Generally, it's been between $2.50 and $4 is what it's been.
No, but I'm just
session.
legally that makes no sense whatsoever. It's not a difference.
Well, can I help answer that question?
Please.
James alluded briefly to the gifting of public funds. So these stations are paid for by the federal government and with our dollars to maintain them over time. And legally, we cannot, given the state constitution, we can't give away that service for free. But the problem is we can't charge for the electricity because we don't own it. Puget Sound Energy owns it. And we're not an electric utility, so the only way we can recover the cost is to charge for the use of that space, whatever the formula is. So I threw out $5 because that's where King County landed. But they're charging in areas where people are already paying for parking. So our formula may be much different. But what we can do legally is we can recover the cost not only of operation and maintenance, but we can also, if we build other stations or install other stations, we can also have in the formula a way to recoup that capital cost.
No, I understood exactly what you were saying, that we can't do a gift of public funds. I just don't understand how, if someone comes after us someday and says, it was illegal for you to charge me for that space because the space right next to it doesn't cost anything, and in fact, if someone doesn't have an electric car and parks there, he or she doesn't pay anything, but because I have an electric car, you're charging me for using that space, but you can't charge me for the electricity. I mean, I don't think any lawyer in their right mind would try to make that argument.
And realistically, most of this is going to be based on an agreement that car owner is going to have with their provider for that power. You're probably going to, when you buy a car, you're going to get a card, and you're probably just like a cell phone. You're probably already going to have an agreement in place for charge sessions.
Okay. Well, James, basically, Seattle, Bellevue, I mean, every city is going through the exact same dance, and they're going to figure out a blanket policy, I'm sure, for the region, right?
Right.
Okay, so we don't have to create the policy.
No. And all it ends up being is what that margin of cost recovery is based on our demand.
And I assume that they'll have that vetted out and make sure that it makes sense.
Well, but that's what you missed Mike's original question on this thing, which was, does the city have to pass an ordinance to actually assess a fee here? And that was his question, and that question was never answered. So the point was that before we apply for a grant, or before we accept grant money, one would like to know what the next step in this thing has to be. I mean, that was Mike's question, and that didn't get answered. Do we need another ordinance that says how we're going to charge for the space next to these electric charging stations?
No.
And I don't know that. At this point, no one else has done that, so.
Why don't you let us take a look at it, and we'll bring that back to council.
Okay, on the second reading.
Yeah, because it's my understanding.
Don't have a second reading.
It's my understanding, James, that if we're using Recovery Act monies, you can't charge for the first 2 years. But staff really needs to look into that. Not only that issue, but also the issue of, similar to what King County, Bellevue, and others have done, is enact an ordinance to look at cost recovery. But it's also my understanding we don't need to have that ordinance in place in order to obligate these monies to install the stations.
But wouldn't we want to know the answer to that?
Yeah. Question. That was a
That was a statement of question.
maybe an inflection on the end of that.
Well, let's ask our city attorney.
Yeah. Last question I have. So looking at the budget, James, I understand you're being very conservative here, but I think Al got to this point. So you have money left over. What additional sites have you scoped out to be able, say, you're able to build a seventh or an eighth station? Where would you put those?
I probably would put more at City Hall or more at CCMV, just because it's the cost of the infrastructure to start from scratch anywhere else just doesn't. And actually, the way these are being put in, there's a gateway system, one unit at each location that allows for you to kind of daisy chain as many units as you would want to afterward.
So the panel boxes that I see identified on the schematic, how are they expandable? How many can you expandable to them?
You don't have to, all in 2 locations, they're actually transformers from PSE, so the power availability is not a problem. And as far as expansion, the expansion is off that original gateway unit. You don't have to go back to the main panel.
I'm going to back up a little bit. Our city attorney, there was a question asked about landing this, and the fee, whether or not we need an ordinance for the fee, or can we accept these funds, the grant monies, allocate them, or you need an ordinance ahead of that to finalize the fees?
I think, given the timing, I think we're fine, too, in going ahead accepting the grant fees and allocating them. We can look into that separate issue with regard to that, because obviously we wouldn't impose that until we knew what we had going into the ground. So at this point in time, as I said, I think you're fine accepting and allocating these fees. And then we'll come back, we could even come back next council meeting, Director Mason, with responses to those questions with regard to it. I think our timing piece, we have sufficient time to do that.
Okay. All right.
Mike's also made the comment that he thinks you may not be able to charge for the first 2 years. So
We're going to need to go look at the actual grant itself. I can't answer that off the head, because there's 2 separate grants.
But shouldn't we know this? I mean, is there any criticality to getting this thing passed today versus?
There is a timing piece with regard to when we have to have everything accomplished by and get the billing done by. So there's that timing piece, and we were just trying to ensure that we had plenty of time to go out for bid and then to be responsive to that. So that's where I'd say there's critical time path happening, but.
But
okay.
Can I ask one other question?
Yeah.
This is one of those cases where we're getting someone else's money, which is really our money, but it's not coming from our budget. And so we're probably much more lax than we would normally be if we were doing this with our own funds. So it forces me to ask the question, if we were telling you that you had to do this with Mercer Island funds, what kind of budget could you have come up with, do you think?
Actually, I would, not argumentatively, but I would say the exact opposite. We've actually been a lot more frugal and a lot tighter because of some of the federal requirements, and because we were really threading a needle with this. When we started off, what we were trying to accomplish was almost impossible. So we're at whatever we have left over will be turned back funds, or we'll try and put in more stations. But that's a really tight budget on this.
Any other questions? All right, we'll bring it back to the council. Anyone like to make a motion?
I would, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move to appropriate $35,000 from an EECBG grant and $45,000 from a DOE Clean Cities grant for the project design, purchase, and installation of electric vehicle supply equipment.
Second. Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion? Okay, Mike?
Just a comment, really, in that I think James did a pretty good job of identifying some of the key areas, but these 3 sites really do fit in well with the regional approach to deploying this infrastructure, because back almost 2 years ago, there were 5 cities that were identified by the Department of Energy to receive some significant grant monies, $20 million plus in grant monies, to deploy electric vehicle infrastructure with the sole intent of trying to electrify the transportation network and get us off of fossil fuels and reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, and also to reduce the pollutants coming off of cars and trucks that are pollutants commonly found in stormwater that you've heard me talk about frequently. The point being is that Puget Sound Regional Council, a number of other regional entities have identified these sites, and Mercer Island's been one of the leaders working with Bellevue and Seattle and others in trying to identify how can we, in a very thoughtful way and a very cost-efficient way, deploy these stations and have a value added not only for the cities but also for the people that live in those communities and then those that go back and forth on I-90. It's in concert with what the state's doing. The state's deploying a green highways network and we'll have charging stations going from Mexico all the way up to Vancouver, British Columbia, and then all the way on I-90 and also on discrete areas on US 2. So James is really to be commended for working with these regional bodies to make sure we've identified the right sites. I would welcome attendance by any members of the council or in the audience to a workshop that the region's putting together in Everett on the 25th of October, where we're going to go over all of these issues. And you've heard terms like interoperability, range anxiety, standards, cost recovery. These are all issues that the region's been grappling with, and they're, to our benefit, there are answers for all of those questions. And so we don't need to spend a whole lot of staff time figuring out cost recovery formulas, nor do we need to really worry about interoperability because a lot of that's already been solved. So I'll make sure that Allie gets the announcement for that workshop on the 25th. But I guess the final comment is it's not only going to benefit the city in terms of reducing some of our costs, the citizens who live here, and I've seen a number of Nissan Leafs already on Mercer Island, but particularly the region because we're so close to I-90 and I-5. So again, thanks James and other members of the staff that have worked on this, and I look forward to seeing these stations in the near future. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion. It's been seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Thank you, James. And now we're on to other business. Council member absences. Anyone anticipating being absent in the near future? Okay, on to the planning schedule.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I have 3 proposals I would like to make that would impact our planning calendar. And if I could, I'll just launch through all of this and then we can come back and talk about it. So with the Lindell lawsuit behind us, I'm not happy about the outcome, but I know there's no use crying over spilt milk. Now's the time to move forward and assure ourselves and the public will do everything we can to promote a transparent and healthy government. First, I'd like to propose an external review of our city's human resources function. I don't want to rehash what's happened or didn't happen in the past, but I do want to know where we stand today and ensure we'll be a top-notch organization going forward. Our citizens should deserve nothing less. So for the planning calendar, I propose that we ask the city manager to identify at least 3 outside organizations capable of conducting a high-quality HR review. And at our next meeting on September 19th, I would propose that we review those applications and approve one. At the following meeting on October 3, I would propose a study session with the selected firm to frame their scope of work, which is I see as a review of our policies, our procedures, and our work climate. The second thing is that with regards to our public records requests, I propose that we add to our agenda a review of our process for handling public records requests with an eye to measuring the volume of requests and our responsiveness to those requests. And third, with regards to transparency and communication, you all know we have gave our communications officer up in an effort to save money during the economic downturn. Before we allocate the money saved from the Lakeline project, I'd ask that our staff provide a proposal for reinstating the communications position with a special focus on governmental transparency. So I put those 3 proposals to you, council members, and ask for support in affecting our planning schedule with respect to those.
Okay, great. Mike, you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With all due respect, Councilmember Bassett, I disagree with those suggestions. That's the, am I to assume that's a vote of...
Can I just make sure, the fact that you disagree, I think that he's just asking for terms of planning, so if, it's just, it's a planning issue as opposed to a discussion.
Got it. Okay, let me go to, I have already requested in writing to the mayor and the deputy mayor, CCing the rest of the council, and signed by Councilmember Grady, that September 19th be allocated time for an executive session with reference to the Lindell situation to talk about our primary duty on the council, and that is the job performance review of the city manager as that relates to the last 18 months of his performance and the Lindell situation in particular, in addition to the PRA. So I think first things first, that is to respect my request and Councilmember Gray's request for an executive session on September 19th to talk about the city manager, and that Councilmember Bassett's request shouldn't preempt that.
For the planning schedule is coming out. I just want for the public record to know there is an executive session scheduled for the 19th, and it's on matters of employment. The RCW, Katie, on that, it's employment issues, correct?
It's personnel.
It's personnel.
It's to discuss a public employee.
A public employee. Okay. So we are having an executive session on the 19th.
Okay, I didn't see that on here. Now, may I suggest, it's 9 o'clock now. It looks to me like this schedule would go, that's on the September 19th, Mr. Mayor's 3 hours as it is now.
We will adjust the schedule accordingly so we're fresh when we have that
Thank you,
executive
Mr. Mayor.
session.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, comments on Bruce's suggestions on the planning schedule. Okay. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I support the first two parts of what Bruce proposed on the study session, on the having city manager come to us with 3 potential candidates and then proceeding on with a study on the study session on the first meeting in October to review it. I'm not sure, I'm not sure that that's the approach we need to take on it, and that's not the decision we're being asked to make here, but we're being asked to at least schedule something on the September 19th meeting where we can then have a more complete discussion whether that's the way to go, Mike. So I respect your point. I think Bruce is just asking for us to potentially explore this, and that's what we would be doing on the 19th. Completely doesn't preclude us from sitting there on the 19th and deciding that's not the way to go.
And in addition, I would suggest, Mike, that it doesn't need to be either or, an executive session or this. It could be both, and that I would propose is perfectly reasonable to do.
Well, I would suggest that the executive session is done first, and then that follows on to what you're talking about. And I would ask, Mr. Mayor, that the executive session is scheduled first of the meeting, just so that we're fresh on that very sensitive and an item that we need to really be focused on, because I know I'm getting less focused now.
I have no we'll work on the schedule. Let's not get too deep. Mike Grady?
Well, I too agree. I think we need to do the executive session early and see if we can refine the issues. And I agree with you, Bruce, in terms of the overall concepts of transparency and policy and management review. I guess my concern is that on the agenda we've got for the 19th is the discussion of the disposition of the Lakeline savings. So as opposed to already carving out money for one or all 3 of these issues, I'd like to see, what's the full suite of activities that we're considering for the Lakeline savings, and if we've got money to do some of this, then let's have that discussion. But I really, before I can make a decision, need to see the whole array.
I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. So we'll assume that proposal will be coming with all the other proposals for what we could use. That will be...
Well, but there's a little difference there, because I think what Bruce is saying is that, and for us to understand what we could potentially get, he would like to have the three professionals come in and advise us, under the circumstances, what kind of review that they would be able to do. But then, again, if you're doing this timing-wise, you've got what Mike suggested, doing the executive session first, and then having an agenda item where these three vendors could come in and talk to us, consultants could come in and talk to us, and then doing the disposition of the sewer lake line as an agenda item further down on that, which would also be the appropriate time to talk about Bruce's third point of the communications person. That's one of the potential options for the sewer lake line. So you can do all of this stuff, but I think it is important, in order to give Bruce's proposal, which may have some merit, a proper hearing, then we need to know exactly what's being proposed and what we could potentially take advantage of. And again, I just don't. I want us to go into this with our eyes wide open as to what, and not just say, well, let's throw $100,000 at it. We don't know what we're throwing $100,000 at, but let's just do it and hope it lands somewhere.
All right. So it sounds like...
I agree with Dan, and also I think the agenda on the 19th is getting very full. I would like to suggest that we move the disposition of the sewer lake line savings to another meeting altogether. There's no need to figure out that way.
Well, we'll work on the agenda, make sure it makes time, and we can vet this out. What we have a proposal is that we are committed to an executive session on the 19th, and that what we're hearing is that you want the discussion of potential costs of hiring a firm to do the review, as well as the communications, to reinstate the communications function, and you want to have those numbers down before you discuss the sewer lake line savings. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. Does anyone disagree with that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't want to talk about the communications or the or additional consultants. You're talking money. You're talking money during a recession. You're talking money when we're talking about raising utility rates. You're talking money. That's money you can nip in the butt right now.
All we're talking about is getting on the agenda. You make the case for or against it when it's on the agenda.
Well, I mean, Councilmember Jenke, you know the deal. You got to stop that stuff early, otherwise it gets legs on it.
We're just talking scheduling. This is just scheduling, not the merits.
Can I just kind of see consensus, that kind of rough framework that I mentioned, is that good? So
does the framework include, so let me get an understanding of what's happening on the 19th. So we're going to do exec session. We're going to potentially talk about 3 consultants, and I'm not clear how we're going to get to 3 by the 19th.
Well, that number is just an arbitrary.
Right.
What we want to talk is about a consultant to review the procedures, right?
But my concern is similar to Jane's in that all of those are going to take a long time, and then if we still have lake line disposition on the 19th, that's going to be a very long night.
Could be. We will work on, we might be moving some stuff around. Okay? All right, does that work then? Okay. And we'll get back, Al and I, Rich, or whoever, Chip, someone who's going to be in charge that will, and Glenn, and we'll work on the timing of it and landing it. And I think on a really high level, we want to make sure we're not worn out when important things are brought forward, so we can have good discussions, right?
Thank you, Mr.
So that's a basic deal, okay? We will make sure that you're crisp, okay? Okay, there's no board appointments. No board appointments. Council member reports.
Also, Mr. Mayor, I still have some, I was just having to review my notes. I still have some issues on the planning schedule.
Okay, please.
On the October one with the long-term pool strategy.
October 3?
Yes, I'd just like to ask staff to include the KG Design Mary Waite Pool Life Cycle Analysis, November 10th, and not to the exclusion of the MI Aquatics Facility Report, September 2010. So the last couple of presentations that we've had on the Mary Waite Pool has not had that KJ Design Mary Waite Pool Life included on it. So please reference that.
Mike, that's very pertinent because that that's one of the options for long-term pool that is being re-teed up, if you will. What about doing some renovation to the pool to extend its life?
It's
a few years, a number of years, whatever.
Pieces are moving right now. We're going to have a
So,
report.
yeah,
on that
it's very
shortly.
timely that we have those reports or the substance of them available for that
Well,
discussion.
thank you. I just thought I had to make note of that because at the last Mary
Good
Waite.
point.
Thank you. I don't know how to react when I get a compliment. Don't let it go to your head. And then I saw two things missing, three things. Shorewood Trail easement, that fell off the planning schedule?
Which one, I'm sorry?
The Shorewood Trail easement? Maybe somebody can get back with me on where that
Councilmember
was.
Sarah, it was determined by Assistant City Manager Shane Maloney that was not needed to go to council.
Fantastic. Deer abatement issue. I'd like to have the staff look at the deer abatement issue, and just for the council to kind of look forward on what we're going to do with these deer whenever the Q2 turn into 4, turn into 8, and they don't have any place to go because we are fortunate to live on an island. And the first floor retail percentage in the CBD, I thought we were going to talk about that by now.
Where are you now? Is this a new
The
item?
no, it's in the Central Business District.
Right.
We had issue with the percentage of retail on the first floor, and I thought that there was.
I think Tim's jumping
Great.
up on this.
Yeah, Tim Stewart, Development Services Group Director. Yes, we are looking at that, putting together. We expect to come back and put a spot on the planning calendar for a work session on that issue.
Okay, just from a housekeeping perspective, to help me manage that type of stuff, so other items to be scheduled, I would suggest that that's supposed to be on the other items to be scheduled, therefore I know that.
That's fine.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we haven't forgotten about it.
Thank you.
Hey, anything else? Anyone else? All right, let's talk about council member reports. We'll start with Jane. Anything?
Let's see, August 10th, sustainability meeting. We talked about how to get the word out to the community about the 22 ways, and I'm not sure what all else we talked about. That was it.
Okay. Dan? Al? Bruce?
Two things. One, the city staff has started a 22 Ways Challenge, and the two of us aren't the people who should talk about that, but we should get city staff to talk about that. Since I'm not prepared to speak about it tonight, we'll count on somebody to help us from staff next time around. That's right, put it on the planning calendar. The second thing is, this
says Ammett.
This evening, you are all missing a presentation by the School Facilities Committee, which has been meeting diligently and a lot, and they are presenting to the public this evening and looking for feedback from the public on ideas that are beginning to gel pretty significantly for them.
You mean they're not watching us?
They're presumably not watching us. So I think we're getting close to the stage where council's going to hear more about that. We've, with the ad hoc committee, had a brief preview of it. The short story is that they're beginning to settle on schools being rebuilt in place, but being rebuilt rather than remodeled, and we'll be trying to get more community input to tweak that before it really solidifies and goes to the school board. But I believe it's headed to the school board in the next couple of weeks. So that's it.
Right.
I just mentioned the workshop on the 25th. I'll get the flyers out to all of you, and we have a good array of speakers from around the region and the country. So if you want to learn about electric vehicles and all that good stuff, that's the time to go.
Right.
The library is having their sale of books here in the next, I think it's going to be Friday, and I had a sneak preview of that today. There's just a lot of fantastic books that you can get a good deal on.
Okay, with that, I just want to commend Chip on an outstanding job tonight. With that, we will. Wasn't nervous at all. Council meeting's officially over.